A resplendent scene before your eyes, serene waters for thousands of acres. Families play on the beaches along its shore. Those with the means to speed along the river by boat, sometimes resting within the many shaded coves for some much-needed relaxation time. Further inland, hikers and hunters escape the hustle and bustle of Knoxville to reconnect with the wilderness. This area is not the riverine paradise it might appear. No, this is Tellico Dam, a TVA project steeped in controversy from its very inception. First coming into the public eye in the mid-1960s, construction of this dam was met with backlash from a number of professionals, from ecologists to anthropologists to farmers to economists. It seemed like everybody at the time wanted the Tellico project to fail. But why? So I'm something of an idiot, and I didn't realize until I had driven 25 miles out to Tellico Dam that I brought two halves of my kayak paddles that don't connect. And I was like, I'm out here. There's 25 miles to get here. I am not turning back. This is a 50-mile round trip. I'm not making it a 100-mile round trip. So I, using half of a paddle, canoe paddled my way somewhere between 2 and 3 miles across the river, because I'm dedicated and maybe just a little stupid. Right around this bend is Tellico Dam. You can see it there in frame. I'll slow down here in a minute so there we go. So you can see it in its entirety. It does exist. It is there. Behind me here is Tellico Dam. Kind of see him there. I'm currently paddling on the Little Tennessee River side. On the other side of that guy is the Tennessee River, the full boy. This is the part of the river over this way. That's him. That was affected by the construction of this dam. The Tennessee River, which flows on, again, its other side, one of the major waterways through the state of Tennessee, flows roughly from Knoxville, Tennessee, down through Paducah, Kentucky, a tributary of the Ohio River, and most of the water in the state flows into the Tennessee, and then into tributaries like this, the Little Tennessee. Anyway, it's currently Sunday morning. There are not a bunch of people out, but this is usually kind of a pop-in area. There are a couple boats out, not a lot. Most people are in church. It's Tennessee, that's what they do. But it is not terribly safe for me to just be out in this tiny boat on open water. I'm going to go moor my boat somewhere that's a little safer, and I will continue this story. Here I am again. Much safer place. I'm on land. Boat, moored. Dam, still there. It's been there for a while. Continuing the story, as the Tennessee River is one of the major waterways through the state, it only makes sense that its development would have been important during the early 20th century. Starting during the New Deal, in the 1930s, the TVA was developed to attempt to bring more affordable energy, among other benefits, to the Tennessee Valley, which is historically very poor, very underdeveloped. With over 50 dams under its control to date, TVA is a force to be reckoned with. Not only have these dams provided affordable electricity to poor and underdeveloped areas, but they've also aided farmers by providing fertilizer. They have provided jobs for the community, which, again, historically very poor and underdeveloped, so that helps a lot. They've helped reduce with flooding to the point where it has saved, in the 1960s, millions of dollars per year, which is something like $30 million per year today, just from flooding along this one river and its tributaries. TVA development has also aided in creating recreational areas, such as the river here, which is frequently used for boating. I am on the land along its shore, also TVA owned. And about a mile and a half from where I'm at, there is a beautiful park called Hall Bend. There are several marinas along here. There are several beaches where families can spend time. But it's not all this peaceful, idyllic landscape. TVA has been mired in much controversy over the years. But the focus of this is not on TVA as a whole. It's on the construction of Tellico Dam. First proposed in the 1930s, the Tellico project was not allowed into public knowledge until 1961. The immediate reaction of the public to the construction of this dam behind me was negative. It did not have any of the benefits that any of the other dams along the Tennessee River did. It does not generate electricity. It does not produce fertilizer. It pretty much just gave people jobs. Records on TVA construction are very spotty, but from my knowledge, from the research that I've done, this is the first and possibly only dam under TVA construction that does not serve a secondary purpose besides stopping water flow. At the time that it was announced, there was also a lot of controversy surrounding endorsements that were given about the construction of the dam, mainly surrounding how they all had the same exact wording, which made it seem as if TVA was saying, "Hi, here's our statement. We need you to say this for money." Is that the truth? I don't know. Allegedly. They were caught trying to bribe the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce. So, take from that what you will. In response to the backlash over the alleged buying out of groups and companies and whatnot in the area, TVA ended up retracting their statement, saying, no, we're not building that dam, not building it. It's not going to happen. Then they lied about how much land they would need for the project that, again, they're not doing. And then they paid, allegedly, a bunch of groups to back them up and form a coalition in their favor. TVA, fearing the backlash they were getting, decided that they would take more of a community approach. Now, this definitely had nothing at all to do with legislation that was passed for them at the time that said that they had to consult with the community more because there was this fear that TVA was too socialist or something. I don't understand. Fear of socialism. It's essentially what it boils down to. TVA attempting to engage with the community more, of course, backfired for them, as many things had in their past. Ended up with a bunch of very small groups that were like, hey, TVA kind of fucking sucks. A lot of opposition, and then TVA became so paranoid that they assumed everybody was out to get them, from writers, journalists, Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, they thought was in cahoots with these tiny groups that were opposing them, environmentalists, just anybody that they thought was not for them was against them. They got very paranoid, and this ended up not being great for them because it created more of a scene. Despite community backlash, TVA was approved for a grant in 1965 to construct this here dam. Immediately upon receiving this grant, TVA bought up all the land that they could, including the land that I'm currently on, which was probably at some point somebody's farm. The land purchased included the 16,500 acres, which currently sits under the water to my left, your right, as well as an additional 17,000 plus acres. Sources, again, are a little unreliable for a lot of this information, but it's somewhere between 16,000 and 24,000 acres additionally were purchased along the shoreline, and some of this was from people that TVA had previously said would be immune from the eminent domain, who were now also very pissed and in opposition to TVA. TVA was also very poorly managed, and while they were eminent domaining a bunch of people's property, they were supposed to have an estimate for the government of how many people they were going to have to buy land from and thus rendering homeless, essentially. They didn't do this properly. They did not do their research, and they had estimated it was roughly 600 families would be displaced from the area. In reality, the number was closer to 350, but again, they didn't care to do their math. They didn't give a shit. They just kind of eminent domained, and that was that, as is common with government. Moving into the 1970s, TVA was still having problems. Environmental concerns began to ramp up with what all this would do to the environment. People were concerned that fish populations would plummet, that sensitive flora and fauna would become extinct. Again, very close to Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I believe it's a 30-minute drive from where I'm at currently. Very delicate ecosystem. It's a temperate rainforest. There are a lot of species in this part of the world that are not found anywhere else. They're unique. It's just, you have to be careful when you are dealing with an environment like this. So there were concerns. It also didn't help that TVA had not filed a proper environmental impact statement for this entire project. So what that is a statement that says, this is what we're doing, this is what we expect to happen to the environment. These are the people we have backing us with facts and logic and whatever else. They didn't do that. That's a big no-no. Legally, federally legally, you have to do that when you're doing something like this. Under threat of litigation, TVA kind of haphazardly threw together an environmental impact statement. This was very clearly bullshit, as they stated that the cost to build this dam would be roughly the same as the money that the area could bring in. So a 1-to-1 ratio of cost to benefit. In reality, this was closer to 3-to-1, so they're spending 3 times as much on the dam as they could feasibly bring in. A professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville noticed this discrepancy, and to kind of shame TVA to make them feel like idiots, had his students do a project in which they looked at the TVA environmental impact statement and kind of pick it apart piece by piece and see exactly where they're getting these numbers from. This, again, shamed the fuck out of TVA. They got real big embarrassed, big mad, and became super paranoid. Despite still not having an EIS by 1971, TVA continued to worm its way out of real trouble like it kind of always has. Already having done a decent bit of the concrete structure of the dam, TVA said that stopping construction would end up doing more environmental damage than continuing. The argument for this was they've already displaced however many thousands of tons of dirt, which would lead to erosion, which could lead to soil issues, and that the only humane thing to do for the environment was to continue construction. Somehow, that was an okay answer. Why? I don't fucking know. It's the government. However, in 1972, TVA, with the Tellico project, faced its first actual big no-no. They were told by the Sixth Circuit Court of the U.S. government to halt production as this area was deemed archaeologically significant. This completely blindsided TVA, as they had never been reprimanded up until this point, at least not with this project. However, they didn't care. They continued. They kept building access roads. They kept purchasing land. And pretty much all they were told to do was don't build the dam. So they said, okay, we won't build on the dam. We'll just do everything else surrounding the project. At this time, TVA had also hired archaeologists, allegedly that they had paid to say that no, it's fine. We can do stuff here. It's okay. There's nothing significant. Allegedly. In 1973, and by complete accident and to the, I'm sure, very happy surprise of the ecologist who found this, the snail darter, a very small fish, which as you can maybe guess by the name, subsists by eating snails, was found in the Little Tennessee River, on which I am currently sitting. This was used as the next way to halt TVA construction of the dam. As the fish had never been found anywhere else, surveys could not find this fish in any other waterways in the area, so it was considered to be endangered. However, TVA, having been notified that they had a potential endangered species in their area, did not stop construction. While the Environmental Species Act paperwork was being filled out, they continued to do construction. They continued, especially, to do things that damaged the habitat of the snail darter, which seems to be, to me, allegedly, seems to be a way to get rid of the fish before the Environmental Species Act could kick in and permanently stop the project. By this time, TVA had already invested hundreds of millions of government dollars into the dam. They had no intention of stopping. They did not give a fuck about this fish, allegedly did not give a fuck about this fish. And they just wanted to get this done. For some reason, through some, I assume, man's ego, this dam had to be built no matter what. In the 1970s, people began to be a little more concerned with indigenous peoples of America. Before, I think it was more of like a fascination. Now it was, oh shit, maybe we fucked up and we need to do what we can for a bunch of people whose ancestors, our ancestors, just like slaughtered wholesale. As there was growing concern for indigenous communities, it was around this time that people began to be a little more concerned about, like, hey, we're permanently destroying a bunch of ancient habitation sites, and sometimes not even ancient, sometimes historic, sometimes, from the 1900s. But they're still being destroyed, and these are priceless sites that we can never get back. Maybe we should investigate into them a little bit. TVA, back on its bullshit, always on its bullshit, decided to, allegedly, bribe all of the Overhill Cherokee, which is the tribe that lays claim to this area, whose ancestors had been living here. Allegedly, bribed the Overhill Cherokee tribe of the modern day to say that they didn't fucking care. They also hired a white man who was married to a Cherokee woman and had him as their Cherokee representative, which is a little problematic, as much as I don't like using that word, as this was, again, a white man. He was married to a Cherokee woman, and I'm sure he had plenty of insights, but he was not Cherokee himself, and was speaking for a whole group of people which have historically been kind of fucked by the US government. And now, allegedly, the US government was fucking them again. In 1976, the Endangered Species Act kicked in, deeming the snail darter an endangered species indigenous only to the Little Tennessee River. Construction of Tellico Dam was to be permanently halted. TVA, again, didn't care. They wanted to finish their passion project, and so they said, okay, we'll just relocate the snail darter. We'll just take this guy and we'll put him in other waters. And that ended up working fairly well. However, it was still not deemed okay to potentially ruin its habitat. This held for 3 years. From 1976 to 1979, no construction was done on the dam. However, in 1979, seemingly by mistake, Congress and the House of Representatives exempted TVA from the Endangered Species Act. Again, the sources that I found were old, they were from the time, and there was a lot of conflicting information. Could I be wrong on this? Quite possibly. I used mostly primary sources, mostly stuff written at the time. According to those, by mistake, the government exempted TVA from the ESA in 1979, and then TVA, by November of that year, had finished construction and closed the dam. If you're anything like me, and I have a bachelor's in anthropology, so I enjoy this stuff, you might be wondering, what happened to all of the evidence of past civilizations buried underneath this river. We will never get those back. Surely somebody cared enough to have explored a little bit, to try to get as much information as we possibly could from those sites before they're gone forever. Both fortunately and unfortunately, as far back as 1967, TVA was funding people through the University of Tennessee in Knoxville to go and do archaeological survey of the area. Most of the early digs, unfortunately, and this is a product both of the time and of there being no oversight by anybody, most of what was found in these earlier discovered sites, these sites found in the late 60s, does not survive today. Again, there was no oversight, so people kind of, if you're digging through and you say, hey, that's kind of a cool, like a lithic, a projectile point, something like that, you might just put it in your pocket and fuck off. And that's kind of how things were done. Unfortunately. Allegedly. Do I have to say allegedly again? Allegedly. At this time, there was a lot of looting again. A lot of looting of sites. There was no real direction for the digs, so it was just people finding things and putting them in bags without trying to map where everything was found and without trying to ascribe some sort of meaning to anything that was found, which is a big part of constructing a dig, is trying to recreate what life might have been like. These early digs, it was just like, I found a rock, I found a bit of ceramic, it goes in a bag, it goes in a museum. If it didn't go in somebody else's house. Upon hearing how these sites were being treated, the Overhill Cherokee had attempted to register a lot of the, at least larger sites, as historic places. This was denied, probably due in part to a little teeny bit of racism. I can't say for sure, but I would imagine just a little teeny bit of racism. And so the Cherokee Nation as a whole, and then later just pretty much every indigenous tribe remaining in the country, decided they were in opposition to TVA. Unfortunately, this didn't fucking matter, because it's a government agency. And again, the government and indigenous tribes don't have a great track record of respect. The government doesn't care. They do what they want. And if you're in their way, then they'll rehome you to Oklahoma, which nobody wants to be in Oklahoma. Sorry if you're in Oklahoma. As there was an issue of looting and poor management, some sites were entirely lost to history. They were recorded in writing, and maybe a few artifacts ended up in the McClung Museum on the University of Tennessee Knoxville campus, but there's no real physical evidence for most of these sites that they even existed. During survey of the area, 129 new sites were discovered before the area was flooded. When looking for potential archaeological sites in the area, priority was given to areas that had not been thoroughly looked into before. So if there was a big site, say, Tellico, that was, the area around it was ignored in favor for places where there could be potential sites, but they had just not been investigated. There were, of course, roadblocks that were met in attempting to perform digs also, mainly being people did not want the government on their land, understandably so, as the government had already taken so much from the local people. There's also fields would be in growth at the time, so it was either you don't perform any testing on the site, or you have to uproot somebody's entire crop yield for the season, and that can really fuck somebody over, so at least they didn't do that. There's also a problem of it's very, very rainy here. We're, again, in a temperate rainforest, and there's a lot of rain in most of the year. So sometimes areas that would need to be investigated were way too muddy to even investigate if they could yield anything, because, again, if it's muddy, it's probably been like that for a while, and there's going to be poor preservation. There was also the major issue, again, of nobody really having any direction for their digs. It was just a free-for-all. You went in there, you found things, you slapped them in a bag, and then maybe they ended up in a museum. Maybe they ended up in a report, and that was it. From evidence found from the digs along the 16,500 acres that are currently underwater, and then the additional potentially up to 24,000 acres along shoreline, it appears that humans have been living in the Tennessee River Valley for up to 10,000 years, which is a very long time, dating back to the early Archaic period. Changes in rainfall and temperature during the Archaic led to a lot of flux in population. It is assumed that people living in the area at the time were at least semi-nomadic, not staying in the same place year-round, kind of moving depending on potentially where food would be, potentially better weather conditions, things like that. During the woodland period, there is a heavier reliance on agriculture, meaning people would not be quite as mobile. There's also a shift to using the Hopewell style of tool. So my microphone died when I was about 30 minutes from finishing what I was recording. I am at a church currently because I don't have the living situation where I can just speak out loud in my own home. It's weird. Sitting in a church parking lot. Unfortunately, let's see if I can get this. The road out is blocked by cops right now. So I'm stuck here until they leave. So I'm considering, because I just stopped here to eat, I'm just gonna read off the rest of my shit. Picking up where my microphone died, and I don't have my microphone on me, so sorry if the audio is a little different. The Mississippi in general is when you start to see more social stratification. You see classes of like priests, stuff like that, and that is evident through burial mounds. In the Tennessee River Valley, the Mississippian period lasted a little bit longer than it did generally throughout the rest of the United States. It wasn't until the Spanish came to the Tennessee River Valley that you see a shift from the Mississippian culture type to what is considered the Dallas culture type. And then, once the Spanish got here, they had replaced the Mississippian culture and the Dallas culture, which is the culture that took over after the Mississippian, influenced potentially by the introduction of the Spanish to the area. When the Spanish had largely moved into the area, you see the overall dying out of the Dallas culture and the introduction of the Overhill Cherokee, which may or may not be descendants of the Dallas people. The Spanish are largely considered to have killed out the remaining Dallas people in the area, as they brought new threats such as guns and bigger dogs than the indigenous people had that ended up killing people off. There's also, things like smallpox. That's one of the diseases that is better known that there was no immunity to. Almost all artifacts found from any of the sites along the Little Tennessee and Tennessee River in relation to construction of the dam are stored in McClung Museum on the University of Tennessee campus. Largely, these remain mostly untouched. There are some that have been sorted through a little bit better than others, but for the most part, at least from what I saw when I was briefly working in the McClung Museum, not working, not getting paid, doing volunteer work with a grad student at the time. I was undergrad. But a lot of it is kind of just bagged up, ready for somebody who is willing to take on that project. Of the artifacts in the McClung Museum, this includes 29,722 artifacts that were collected from the area, including 21,757 lithics, 5,943 ceramics, 2,022 Anglo-American artifacts, so more things from the historic period, and 2,258 faunal remains. Allegedly, there were up to about 500,000 human bone fragments that were found, but the source that I had pulled that from had a lot of inconsistencies. So is that accurate? I don't know. There's no real way to tell, because that was a primary source that had a lot of inaccuracies. It was also found that most of the artifacts were local, but there were artifacts from as far south as Mexico, as far north as New England and the Great Lakes, which implies that there were trade networks that at least the people in the Tennessee River Valley were a part of. They may not have been personally going to Mexico for certain lithic materials, but they were in connection with people who could. Now, there are a couple of sites that are worth mentioning just because they were investigated a little better. I'm not going to go into super detail. I will have a written document with a little more detail. This is just a brief synopsis of some of the larger sites that were found along the Little Tennessee River. These sites yielded more than other sites in the area, in part due to more professional measures being taken, in part due to long periods of occupation, which allowed for more artifacts to accumulate over time. First is Tumultli, or 40 MR5, used through the Archaic period up to the Historic period. There's a lot of stratigraphic disturbance in this site, which made it very difficult to tell what was from when. A lot of it was based on the artifact type. So if a certain lithic style was used in a certain period, that's how you would know that that was when that was from, instead of based on stratigraphy, which is the typical way that you would date things like that. Of 84 burials found, 55 were from the Dallas period, 8 were over Hill Cherokee, and 20 were undetermined, again because of the great stratigraphic disturbance. Then there's Mealoquo, or 40 MR3. This site dates back to the Archaic period, and there's a long history of occupation based on the amount of post holes that are shown in the soil. There's also no mention of human burials from this site. Next is Chota, or 40 MR2. There were 17 burials found at this site. Most of what was found, as far as I could find, was not ascribed to a certain time period. It was all just, here are the burials, these are people. When are they from? We don't know. And lastly, Tokwa, or 40 MR6. The initial investigation of the site began in the 1930s. Unfortunately, all human remains found were tossed aside in favor of the grave goods that they were buried with. So any people, tossed, yeeted. Their grave goods, taken. Those are good. Any data from this initial dig, though, is sitting in the McClung Museum. Most of it was probably, unfortunately, looted. The first proper excavation was done in 1975. This showed that the site had at one point been about 5 acres squared, which is the largest site that was found in the area. Tokwa contained 2 burial mounds, with a total of 511 burials recorded, the majority of which came from these 2 mounds and not elsewhere. There's also evidence here of a very long occupation. Now, with all of this being said, what conclusions can we draw about the dam? Is it good? Is it bad? Was it worth it? Firstly, it does not serve the purpose that TVA dams typically do. It doesn't aid in river travel, it doesn't generate electricity, it doesn't help to produce fertilizer, it doesn't help with flooding, really. It's kind of just there, and the area along it is used for recreational purposes. Second is that TVA doesn't care about anything that isn't TVA. Allegedly. They continually undermine authority, and did whatever they felt like, whether this was against public interest or the law. They went so far as to seemingly, allegedly, try to exterminate an entire population of fish because it was in their way, even though it was potentially only found in a certain place. Third, they did not care, seemingly, a single bit for the archaeological sites that were found underneath the flood zone. If not for the issue with the snail darter postponing construction, so much less would be known about the area. If TVA had actually cared enough to properly investigate all the archaeological sites along the Little Tennessee, who knows what else we would know. All in all, TVA brought along with it the promise of jobs and cheap electricity, but it also brought untold amounts of destruction. They made a mockery out of what a government agency of this sort could be. It is undoubted that TVA helped the Tennessee River and its tributaries in many ways, but that doesn't make up for the fact that they kinda fucked up with Tellico Dam. The area, beautiful as it may be, holds the secrets of the past beneath it, secrets that we will never be able to properly investigate. Buried beneath millions of tons of water are the homes of people, both from modern times and ancient. Homes that we can never get back. And what was all of this for? What was all of the construction for? The years of fighting to build a dam that seemingly serves no purpose.
Unsure how clear this audio is because my little microphone guy isn't plugged in, but along the shore here, and the water is like 3-4 feet higher than when I usually come out here, there is an area just a little further ahead where there are a bunch of very old ceramics, like I'm talking 1920s to 1960s, and I just leave them untouched. I identified from the larger bits when they were from, and just kind of left them be. Figure they've been here undisturbed for 40-something years. They should continue to be undisturbed, but I'm really sad that the water's so high, because it is kind of cool to see a bunch of ceramics from fucking ever ago that undoubtedly washed up from something left by a person who used to live here. Or perhaps it was from a bulldozer and got stuck in the rocks along the shore and was just kind of there for however long before the soil eroded and left it visible. But whatever. Can't see it today. Maybe I'll come out another time.
So my final thoughts about Tellico Dam. Overall, I think having all the recreational areas available to the community is a great benefit. There's not a lot to do out here. This is Lenore City, Tennessee. It's a pretty small town. It's growing because nobody wants to live in Knoxville. It's too expensive. But there's not a lot to do. Despite this, I think the loss of cultural information and history from building Tellico Dam was to the detriment of everybody. Am I saying that building Tellico Dam was bad? Yeah, kinda. There were probably better ways that recreational areas could have been provided to the community. Ways that didn't destroy priceless archaeological sites. In the end, the result is this ugly-ass concrete dam that serves no purpose that any other TVA dam does. It's just there.